revolve around science.
The Science of Society with Elder Darryl Waistline Mitchell.
In other words, they formulated what would become in Europe the ideology of fascism. It was created right here in the United States of America. You know, I understand that the notions of fascism, right, come out of Europe. I understand it. It come out of Europe in the period after the First World War, and it was used to consolidate and fight the Second World War. However, an investigation shows that fascism was birthed in the United States of America. Yes, it was. Excellent. And it was a terrorist overthrow of democratic governments, man, the establishment of the open terroristic dictatorship of capital, because the Southern Redeemers ruled on behalf of Wall Street, baby.
Explain that in detail for us,
you know,
if you don't mind.
Yeah, it's an interesting history. You know, Donald Trump, on January 6th, he attempted an insurrection because he claimed that the election was stolen. He claimed that there were extra ballots placed in ballot boxes, and blocked him and prevented him from being able to have enough votes to win the electoral votes. Now, what he did was adopt a game plan that came out of like 1874 or 5. The presidential election is called the Hayes-Tilden Agreement. See, one of them had like 140 some electoral votes, and the other one didn't have enough votes to win, and he contested 3 states in the South, Georgia, Florida, and I think it may have been Alabama. But anyway, an agreement was made where Hayes was given the election, right, and made president, man, and they agreed to withdraw the federal troops from the South. And withdrawing the federal troops from the South set the basis for a violent counter-revolution that would overthrow the newly elected Reconstruction governments. Now, when we talk about fascism, we're talking about its signature character is that it overthrows and establishes bourgeois democratic government and establish in its place an oligarchic form of rule based on open terrorist dictatorship of big money, man. That is the definition of fascism, and that definition came out of the South. Now, the only thing in European history you had that was similar to that was Louis Bonaparte and what they call Bonapartism. That was different, though, and I don't want to go astray too much, but I have to mention because it's part of the same curve of history. So we're talking about the overthrow of Reconstruction governments that were filled with freemen, black people, because you couldn't just simply vote them out of office. Because believe it or not, you had a narrow layer of white people who were voting with the freemen. However, you never had enough white people to be able to defeat the reaction. Because in the South, you know, the average person simply believed that we were beneath their dignity, that we were born to live under their foot. They simply believed that in the South as a deep, violent form of culture and ideology, deeply violent, deeply brutal, hideous, you know. So my point is fascism, although it was articulated out of Europe, was birthed in the United States of America as government on horseback, an oligarchic form. And what I'm saying is that Donald Trump form of rule and government was based on the oligarchic model. He deliberately wrecked and dismantled how governments operate, and in their place set up a system based on friendship and you having a connection, a financial connection with the oligarchy. See, in that sense, he borrowed a page out of Russia looking at oligarchic forms of rule, but my point is that Trump oligarchic form of rule was an oligarchic form of fascism that harkens back to the plantation system. What kind of system is that? Where you have one master and he ruled over his small kingdom. And he governed based on what he feels at any given moment. That's an oligarchic form of fascism. Biden comes forward with a constitutional form of fascism. He is the ultimate jailer. He constructed the modern penal system, and his most faithful and loyal prosecutor was that fine-ass Kamala Harris, man. You know, I be hating it when good-looking women be like, you know, like, I can't say that, man, because she look too motherfucking good.
Okay.
But I can say that, like, they be siding with the enemy on a bunch of stuff, man, that I don't care for at all, to say the least, man. But I ain't gonna dog Kamala, because, no, it's Biden. And what if he don't make it through his whole presidency? What if he go down? What if it's man down 20 months from now?
She'll be the president. Some people are already making those assertions.
Well, you know,
for lack of words.
I don't want to go too far off, but see, when we talk about Trump fascism, and we talk about it being connected to the Hayes-Tilden Agreement and that playbook where you claim you was cheated and you go for the compromise. See, Bush did that because Mondale had more votes than Bush, but they contested 3 states in the South. Bush brother Jeb was governor of Florida, man, and they stole electoral votes, and the Supreme Court put Bush in office. See, that playbook, it goes back to 1876. This is getting ready to get sweet, man.
Tell us the importance of understanding the Supreme Court's role in all of that.
Oh, man. Wow. See, this notion, okay, the Supreme Court always tend to rule on behalf of the previous form of political power by definition. You appoint people who grew up under a certain form of political rule, so their expertise becomes how to develop the legal system in such a way that it continuously conforms to the demands and needs and whims of the old ruling class, or the ruling class who was there when they grew up. I'm trying to describe an institution that inherently becomes backwards. Now, if they become backwards and stay backwards, and I want a comparison to show the dialectic, the dynamic, they can stay backwards for 30, 40, 50 years. Then they catch up. If it was a corporation, if you don't change and conform, you die that horrible death in the market. We're watching corporations and companies die in the market. See? So when we talk about the Supreme Court role, their role is generally to uphold the old social order, but I'm watching how this court that was appointed by Trump rule against Trump. See, I think they might prefer a constitutional form of fascism, which Biden represents, over an oligarchic form, because they probably scared shitless that if a guy like Trump come back in office, he'll end up having a Supreme Court justices put in jail. You know,
that potential is there now that he was vindicated, acquitted in this hearing recently. So that might very well be a reality. We could see Trump 2024, 25.
Well, I hope that what we have is our first significant form of communism for 2024. It was funded by the Ford Foundation. Stay with me, man, because it's all connected and go back to Detroit. But we bouncing from Detroit, the Industrial Revolution, the South, Trump's oligarchic form of fascism being shoved out the door. In comes Biden's constitutional form of fascism. And one of the first things he did in office, man, was sign an executive order that has the potential to destroy the impact and the administration of Title IX of the Civil Rights Act. See, anytime you pass laws to nullify the previously existing democratic regime, That's the path of fascism. Page 32, you can find this for free on Marxist Glossary Facebook page. Or we're going to have a way like where you can hit up a platform and get this stuff, you know. Here's what it says. It says, fascism is the merger of the state and the corporations. 21st century USA, fascism in power is the dictatorship of the mega corporate state, overthrow of political liberty, in parentheses, habeas corpus, nullification of rights of the individual, in parentheses, due process, and overthrow of local and citywide representative organization institutions by laws that create the emergency financial manager system. Fascism is nullification of bourgeois democratic rights, deployment of secret squads of armed people, use of police, murder, and political disenfranchisement as primary methods of control of all people. New paragraph. European fascism of the past century sought to preserve the colonial architecture of world imperialism. German and Italian fascism pretended to stand above classes and were driven by the most reactionary, most chauvinistic, and most imperialist sector of finance capital. 21st century USA fascism seeks to consolidate the world rule of the transnational class of speculative finance. Last paragraph. President Trump fights for an oligarchic military form of fascism based on the plantation-style white supremacy and the great leader principle, while the Democrats seek an institutional fascism that preserve democratic structures without liberty for the individual. And that definition come out of blood, sweat, and tears. And a generation of Marxists who come before me, how we develop our apparatus to educate people, man. That's the hallmark of being true to yourself, to the social revolution, man. And however you understand getting yourself free. We talked about Biden because he passed the executive order, which made us measure his constitutional form of fascism against Donald Trump's oligarchic form of fascism. And you know, a constitutional form of government is more effective and stuff, man. Trump couldn't even get the response to the pandemic off the ground because an oligarchic form outlook, it views each state and section of state governing bodies as being the feudal-like property. It's the kingdom of the people that's there on the ground. He doesn't see a nationwide border-to-border federal response, man, funded as a necessity of government. He don't see that. They don't see it like that. So people are going to enjoy a constitutional form of anything over an oligarchic form. Both fascist states. Both are fascist states. You know, so we talked about that a little bit, man, and then we gave that definition of fascism.
You mentioned education. An area that I'm struggling with is in regards to education. You know, we talk about waking people up, raising awareness, you know, this whole idea of being woke, being conscious. Most of us don't realize that there is need for struggle. There is no longer a civil rights movement. There's not a freedom movement. People are satisfied, content with their jobs, with their property, you know, able to buy a house, buy a couple of cars, take a vacation every year. So some innocent black person gets shot down in the street or something, you know, police brutality or whatever. People are pretty content.
See, I agree with what you're describing. I don't agree with how it was described emotionally, because it's not like people are emotionally content. From, okay, like I'll be 69 in September this year. From my point of view over like, let's say 50 years, because I was really seeing stuff at 19. Over 50 years, you see how the ruling class disorganized and dismantled people and why they destroyed public educational school systems so that the people would lack the self-awareness and consciousness to articulate everything they feel in a way that drives the social process. Like the capitalists, man, our bourgeoisie, they're degenerate. See, our starting point is that they are a degenerate, dying class with deeply sadistic tendencies, you know, deeply horrific. That's our starting point. And the level of demoralization it has had on like almost, see what's almost from my point of view, 3 generations, right? If we measure generations every 20 years, 22, you know, that's 3 generations for me. So I see this process, but I also see how people are waking up ever since, like, I think it was what I used as a marker, the social forum in 2010. You know, following on the heels of that, you had like Trayvon
Housing
Martin.
crisis.
Yeah, you had Trayvon Martin, and right before then, didn't you in 2012, didn't you have Occupy Wall Street? Then Trayvon Martin. What I'm saying is it's a process of the people waking up in the fight against the enemy who controls the ideological sphere, man. But it's interesting because we getting ready to have some openings that didn't exist before because we have a new form of media. Before, we used to meet at work in a factory and stuff, man. Because I grew up and worked with people where you had 3,000 to like 10,000 people under one roof. It creates a different form of consciousness, man, and collective consciousness of one another and things like that. You know, this whole new technology and form of communication is coming together, man, with people who live in isolation in a sense of industrial society. You know, they pick up a lot of their behavior online, and they can be fooled because you can construct all these phony images, which means you describe everything the wrong way. You know, you describe what it is, but you give it the wrong body language and movement because you're doing the dance of the ruling class using this ideology and stuff like that, man. You know what I'm saying, man? So we're looking at Biden, his administration doing that. We're looking at education. We're looking at the dismantling of the public school system. And we have to have a form of presentation that allows us to reach masses. So it's a mixture of highly first-rate intellectual material, like the stuff, man, that Taka, Kilimanjaro be doing, man. He be having me, man, like all messed up. His scholarship, man, thing is impeccable, man. You know, it's helping me understand the flow of history and dialectics for real. You know,
I'm trying to grasp a lot of that. There's one big book, 1,000+ pages, called Ka Square, Philosophy and Methods, and it's primarily centered around and its roots in ancient Africa, and it's teaching me to think scientifically and to process things materially and to get out of being an idealistic person myself.
Yeah. See, the thing I love about Marxism, man, is it gives you the language and way to understand the moving components in society. People didn't have a way of talking about it, man. Marx, they combine these words together so very different. For instance, he used words like social relations of production. Nobody ain't never mixed it up like that before, man, to describe a component of society. He talked about productive forces as being like the human beings, first of all, the brains your mama give you, the energy source, machinery, right? And how all of that drives society. He called that productive forces. Within productive forces, once you take out the human brains your mama give you, you got means of production, a language that allow us to understand society. We were able to define society starting at the first sentence. Society is constituted, formed on the basis of productive forces and productive relations, or what we call social relations of production. Period. First sentence. Society is constituted on the basis of productive forces and social relations of production. Second sentence. Productive forces, the brains your mama give you, and energy sources, while social relations of production are the relationship of people to property in the process of production. It is the relationship of people to property in the process of production. And that's how we learned it and was taught that. Coming out of Detroit, where we developed these mass forms of education based on a factory system. We did what Gordy and them was doing in the studio. We was mixing it up like that, man. So education is always, is what we live for, man. It is our purpose, right? It's that which drives us to fight for like the life of the mind.